So I'm going to talk about MARCThing, which is a project I recently did. The genesis for MARCThing is when I started working at LibraryThing, which is a popular website for where you can catalog your own materials online. And one of the things that LibraryThing tries to do really well is provide high-quality cataloging information. There are a lot of other sites that are kind of social book networking sites, but we've always kept that as a high priority. Fundamentally, we think that funny characters matter, and we know that you own books that Amazon doesn't sell. So we need to have a wide range of sources where we can get data from, and we need to have that data be very high quality. So thinking about how to solve this problem and to replace the original hacky code that was doing this, which actually got written the very first week that LibraryThing existed, at a time when our founder didn't even know PHP. So it was pretty hacky. It worked fairly well, but looking at what we would need in the future and to really solve this problem well, what I saw is we kind of needed a self-contained web application or web service which would do everything you needed it to do with Z39.50 and MARC without you needing to know anything about those standards. So the fundamental idea is that if you want to work with library data, you shouldn't really ever have to look at something like that unless you're a cataloger or a hardcore library geek. You should just be able to work with something like this, where the fields have been parsed out. They're in a... What? Sorry, what's funny? I don't get it. I'll go on. Okay, so you shouldn't have to work with a MARC record directly. You should just be able to get this magically parsed thing in a format where the data is extremely useful for what you want to do, and you don't have to carry on any of that history of why MARC works the way it does or anything like that. If you don't want it in this format, you should be able to get it in whatever format you want, XML, JSON, whatever. So, and if you want to do a Z39.50 search, there are 9 parameters that you got to get, and you got to get them exactly right if your search is going to work. And the remote server has to implement the standard perfectly for it to work. That's just too much information to be interspersing throughout your code. It really just calls for that being packaged and hidden behind the scenes in a little black box. You should just be able to do something like this, and be able to, all you need to do is specify what the server is you want to search and what your term is, and not worry about any of the details, and get back very useful data from that. So, ideally this should be all you need to know, a very simple REST-based interface. So when thinking about how to do MARCThing, there were some very obvious inspirations of other projects which have done a great job of taking something very complex but very useful and putting a simple interface in front of it. Probably the most notable is Solr, where they've taken the Lucene search indexing and put a very simple interface in front of it, which has allowed people who don't know the first thing about Lucene to have a high-quality search engine. Another example is a Python library called the Universal Feed Parser. The Universal Feed Parser can take even the most awful RSS and clean it up and make it useful, no matter how badly the people who created it abused the standard. And the third one is a library called Eventlet. I hope to give a lightning talk on that because it's really cool. But the basic idea behind Eventlet is that it allows you to run tens of thousands of processes within a single thread. So you can create incredibly highly scalable, especially network applications. The sort of thing that you would do in a specialty language like Erlang, probably. And the beauty of it is that they're very clever about how they presented the interface. So you only need to put in a couple lines of code. You don't need to change how you code to use it. And suddenly your code just has these superpowers. So, and then another inspiration is the web frameworks like Django or Ruby on Rails, where the principle is you shouldn't have to know a lot about databases, and you shouldn't have to know a lot to be able to build a basic data-driven website on the internet. As I was building it, I started off with some really good foundations, which made the project a lot easier. I used the PyMarc library for parsing the MARC records, and PyZ39.50 for doing the Z39.50. And then the whole thing is tied together using Django. It's really pretty simple, so I didn't use a lot of the advanced stuff that Django does for you. It's just there wasn't really any need for it. But it does give you a nice little administrative interface for free. So if you, like us, if you have hundreds or thousands of Z39.50 servers, it's nice to just have a little web interface that you can go into if you have to change a setting. And then the last foundation is Python Paste, which is a pure Python web server. It's multi-threaded, so it can handle a fair amount of load. It's not going to work as well as Apache, but it's going to work well enough. Now, the first rule of Optimization Club is you do not talk about Optimization Club. But the third rule is as soon as your code is faster than the underlying transport protocol, the optimization is over. And that's certainly the case here. Even the dumpy little Python Paste web server is going to be able to handle more of a load than whatever Z39.50 server you're connecting to. That's always going to be the bottleneck. So don't worry too much about performance, I guess. And so with this foundation, it should be pretty easy, right? We've got these great libraries that other people have written to work with MARC and Z39.50, and it's a well-defined, long-used standard. This isn't crazy cutting-edge stuff. So why was this hard? Well, a big part of it is just the fundamental complexity of MARC and Z39.50. To do a Z39.50 search, you have to have these 9 different settings, and they have to be exactly right. And if they haven't been implemented on the server side, it doesn't matter that you theoretically got the settings right. MARC comes with its own inherent complexity. Probably the main thing is kind of bridging the gap between machine-readable cataloging and machine-usable cataloging. An example there would be if you wanted to pull out the number of pages in a book from a MARC record. Well, that's not stored in a controlled field. It's just an uncontrolled field. So if you want that, you have to do some really complex processing to get that data out into a format that's actually, usable, that you could add to another number or something. So with that inherent complexity, that creates all sorts of challenges. But the fundamental problem of people not following the standards is just a universal one, no matter how simple the standard is. In a way, I think there's kind of a zen of standards where the only standard that everybody would follow would be the one with no rules at all. The more rules you have, the more ways things are going to get screwed up or misinterpreted or whatever. But it's an inevitable problem to some degree. RSS is a great example of that. It's a simple standard. It's widely used. Everybody understands the value of it. It's not rocket science. But people get it so wrong in the real world, regardless. This is a snippet of code from WordPress. And this is how WordPress actually processes their own RSS, their own quasi-RSS format. And if you look at it, they're just using regular expressions on it. They're not really parsing it. And the reason why is that the XML they generate isn't valid XML. And this is for their import stuff, not their usual RSS feeds, but they have a way to dump your data to an RSS format. So if WordPress can get it so wrong as one of the main producers of RSS on the internet, you can't really expect people to do a lot better with much more complex things like MARC and Z39.50. So a lot of the value in MARCThing is not just getting it so it does things the way it's supposed to be, but it also deals with the harsh realities of poorly implemented systems. So there's a lot of kind of domain knowledge of me spending countless hours messing with settings trying to get things just right. Okay, so the other part of what MARCThing does, besides do Z39.50 searches, is it parses MARC. And that's something that almost everyone in this room has probably had to do at one time or another. And we often kind of just use very hacky techniques to do that. I tried to create something that's pretty logical and encapsulates most of the things you have to do to bridge the gap between machine-readable and machine-usable cataloging. This is a configuration file. It's really pretty simple. It's actually pure Python. So kind of the enterprise way of doing something like this is you'd have a big-ass XML file, and then you'd have a class that parsed the XML file and resolved all the dependencies and injected them and created a new object from that. And you probably have a whole other class that would generate the XML file in the first place. Well, I'm sorry, that's just nuts. This here is actual code. You don't have to parse it. You just import it. And it's not harder to edit at a simple level than it would be for XML. If your cataloger realizes that I don't know what I'm talking about, and that should be the J subfield instead of the N, they're not going to have a problem doing that fundamentally. So the idea with the MARC parsing is that it should make the simple things simple and kind of hide the harder things away. So now that we've got our data parsed, we have to present it in some fashion. And I didn't get around to doing a slide for this, so you'll just have to listen to my melodious voice. But the idea, Solr has done this extremely well. They basically say any format that you can think of, we'll get the data back to you so you can run with it. If you want XML, fine. If you want JSON, if you want Ruby, if you want PHP, we can do that. Right now, MARCThing only does the two presentation formats that we need, which are XML and Python. But it wouldn't be hard to add new ways to do that. And one thing that we're going to do, which I think is kind of a cool idea, is we're going to make it so you can present the MARCThing results in the same format as Amazon Web Services. So instead of using Amazon Web Services for some mashup, you can use your library. And, oh wow, I have so much time left. I was really hoping that I'd be run out of time so I wouldn't have to cover this last topic, but I guess I do. And it concerns the licensing of MARCThing. When we initially announced it, we thought a lot about how can we provide value and something useful to the library community without hurting our site. One of our main strategic advantages is that we do cataloging so well, and so it's kind of a risky business idea to just give that away to our competitors. So I believe very strongly in open source. You know, pretty much every piece of code that would be useful to somebody else in the world, I've tried to get released as open source in the most liberal license as possible. So I really believe in this. But you know, this is a situation where, unfortunately, art and commerce kind of conflict, and so we really want to give a gift back to the library world. LibraryThing takes that very highly. We have 6 full-time employees. 3 of them have MLSs, and I'm not a librarian, but I play one on the internet. So we have a very strong commitment to that, and so we really want to do something here that doesn't hurt us as a company. So I'm not sure of the best way to do that, and I'm totally open to suggestions and discussion on that. You know, if you got a problem, just email me. Let's talk about it. We're not a big faceless corporation. If we were a big faceless corporation, it would probably be a lot less risky for us to release this. So even if you're not down with the licensing, even if it just totally offends you, even if you don't have any interest in using MARCThing for your projects, I kind of hope that the big idea that I'm pushing here gets through and kind of gains some traction in the library world. And the idea there is that all the open access, all the APIs, all the open data in the world don't mean anything if people can't get what they want in the format they need it in with the tools that they have at hand. So I talked earlier about the Zen of MARC standards, the pseudo-Zen. Well, there's some actual Zen behind this. This idea of access and bringing things where people, in a format that people need them to be in. Z39.50 is kind of like the wind. It may be permanent, but it's not where we need it when we need it. So basically, we've got plenty of wind in the library world, but we need more fans. So thanks.
Does anyone have any questions for Casey?
Yes.
So I understand the code is probably not open source, but are you planning on providing the service to the public? And if so, what's the cost model for that?
We like to make it as free as possible, I think. Especially for non-profits, non-commercial uses. If one of our main competitors wanted to use our service, we wouldn't say no, but we'd make them pay. No, it's not decided yet completely.
Thank you, Casey.
Thanks.